Hi, everyone. Michael Cavacini here, and welcome to another one of my interviews. And today I have an interesting interview. Today we're talking to Paige Troxell. She's the creator, director, editor, and producer. That's a lot of titles for the new Fred Heads documentary, which I just watched, and it's fabulous. Paige, thank you for joining. Really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me.
No, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
Yes. So, for those who are unaware, tell us, what is the Fred Heads documentary all about?
So the Fredheads documentary is we have been saying essentially is one anti-bullying PSA, and it's really about finding your friendships and your home and your community. And it's through the love of a hobby and a film that has connected so many different people. And they have found that they connect on this deeper level of what is like survival, right? And so everybody thinks that they were alone in this, that they think that they were alone in loving a Nightmare on Elm Street. And then they join this community and find out that everybody in the community essentially feels the same way. So it's created like a home. And so with our documentary, that's hopefully what we're showing, is that like it's this community that we've built.
Yeah, that's great. That actually reminds me of a quote from Barry Manilow, who if anyone that's followed me long enough, you know that I like older music, Barry Manilow, Kiss, and things of that nature. And he has a quote that he said before where he says, "Misfits aren't misfits among other misfits." And I was like, yeah, I like that, right? I mean, we, amongst fellow horror fans, we're not the weird one, right? Everyone's weird, and we're all celebrating our weirdness together. And um, I don't know about you personally, but I know that in school and places like that, especially high school or elementary school, not as much college. College is much better experience, but I would not necessarily be part of one clique. I would try to be friendly with different groups. I would try to blend in because I would feel like I was. I feel like I was in a better place if I blended in than if I stood out. I don't know if I'm alone in that feeling, but I just felt like that was like to be safe, blend in. But I feel like at a horror convention or something like that, you're not really trying to blend in. You're just trying to have a good time, and you're not
Mhm.
necessarily have these walls up. You're just like, whatever. Let's see how crazy other people are, and just kind of revel in that atmosphere. I don't know if you can relate to any of that, but
I do. I didn't go to high school. I talk about it a little bit in the documentary, but I was severely bullied, and to the point where like our school system wasn't doing anything. And so my parents like had had enough. And my eighth grade year was incredibly rough. And I was getting ready to go into high school. And my parents were like, we're not going to subject you to this anymore. Here are your options. And I chose to homeschool. And so I homeschooled for 2 years and graduated early. I wanted that school experience. I wanted to continue playing volleyball. I wanted to, join the clubs. I was in theater, even though I was bullied, like I had little pockets of things that I would do. But I wanted that school experience and it was kind of like taken from me. And so my husband, he kind of was that where he was like kind of like friends with everybody. He was kind of like he flowed in between. He kind of stayed under the radar. He was like friends with the cool kids, the not cool kids. And so he talks a little bit about that. And when he does, it reminds me of like the convention scene a little bit. Like I look at the conventions as like this is kind of like our high school experience because like we get to be a part of the clubs or we get to be like in the like talent show, which would be like the costume contest or something, So like when I go to these conventions, I just imagine if I would have been able to have a good high school experience, that this is what it would have been, because all of these people we come from different walks of life, we come from different states, sometimes different countries and stuff, but we all just are there getting along and creating this culture of like happiness and fun. And so I joke that it's an adult summer camp. But so for me, like I think that that's what a high school experience like could have been if I would have like went to like a high school that would have been good and not.
yeah, no, I don't think you missed out with high school. Well, I went to an all-boy Catholic high school. So that was, I like to say that I no longer identify as being Catholic because I went to Catholic school for elementary school and high school. That and George Carlin. That was enough for me to say, no, thank you.
Love this film.
But it was very much broken up by neighborhood. You had and I'm from Philadelphia, so you had the kids from North Philly, the kids from Roxborough, the kids from South Philly, and I lived in Center City. So I was like the only person who lived in Center City. No one knew, and everyone makes assumptions. Like they would say, "Oh, you're from Center City. You must be rich, right?" So it's funny how people will kind of come up with these ideas of who you are, either based on the way you talk, the way you look, where you
Yeah.
live, wherever, right? We just kind of we like to label, not necessarily out of for malicious purposes, but we just like to organize things in our head, I guess. But sometimes
Yep.
it can have a bad effect. And out of curiosity, just since you mentioned school, I mean, I'm just curious. Did you, and no judgment, judgment-free zone here. Did you wind up going to college afterward, or was that just not of
I
interest?
did. I did. So I'm from the south side of Chicago. So like I'm from a very poor area that people tend to graduate eighth grade and that's it. They get pushed into like the workforce. Like my parents had me when they were teenagers, and like that's what they had to do. All their friends did it, and then a lot of my friends did it. So I actually was the first person in my family to go to university, my entire family. And so I have a huge Italian American family. And I was the first person to go to college. And I think that for me, I saw where I lived and the people around me and the things that they were doing. And I watched TV shows like A Different World. I was into TV and movies and media and film. And so for me, like I watched shows like A Different World, and I saw that they were in college, and I saw that like that's what you do and where you go. And so for me, I always aspired to that's what I want to do is I want to go to college. I want to get a degree. I do hair, but like I also like wanted to have a degree. I wanted to do something serious. I wanted to make money. And so I went and got a degree in finance. And so I don't use it at all. I worked in the industry for 2 years. But I at least felt accomplished doing that.
Yeah, that's kudos to you. I'm from an Italian American family too, so lots of similarities. But so out of curiosity, just to tie it back to what the topic of the day here, you're talking about how Fred Heads is a big PSA, for anti-bullying. So did you find that when you went to college that it was a different environment when it came to bullying? Because I imagine it was. I mean, I went to Temple University, which was like 30,000 students or something ridiculous. I don't know how large your college was, but I assume it was bigger than your elementary school. So did you find that bullying was less of an issue because there were more people and different
I
majors
think
and all these other things going on?
I think people were just a little more mature in college. I know that, oh, I mean, obviously, like we were still coming fresh out of high school and we were shell shocked and stuff, but I went to Purdue. And so for me, like Purdue's Purdue. It's a huge school. And I I felt like people were just a little more mature, and I felt like the people that were there, everybody was just kind of doing their own thing. Nobody cared about what you looked like, what neighborhood you were from, how much money you had in your account, who your parents were, what their jobs were. Like nobody cared about any of that. Everybody was just there kind of doing their own thing. And like we had people from like all over the world at Purdue. And so I think that if people were those people who were like the bullies for me, like got there, they were probably the ones who were shell shocked. They probably were the ones who then were like, oh, I'm not the big fish in a small pond, anymore. And so for me, it kind of was like a relief. Like I met a lot of like my friends who are currently my friends still in college. I felt like I could breathe in education, if that makes sense. Like I felt like I wasn't so worried about somebody looking over my shoulder or bullying me. I could focus on what was in front of me and absorb it instead of being so timid and scared, like who's gonna cut my hair in science class, or who's gonna, throw rocks at me or break my glasses, or, so for me, I loved college. I loved it a little too much. I went partying, went crazy, and did my freshman year. I for sure went a little wild. Um, but in general, I loved it because it was that aspect. It was a mature thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I encourage anyone watching this who may have had a horrible experience in high school because of bullying or cliques or things like that. If you can go to college, even if you can start with community college, which I did, there's you should really experience it, because like the coolest thing about college for me is being able to take classes about, race relations, and taking human sexuality, and literally anything that interests you, you can take. And for me, being in those classes where you're like in a circle, essentially sharing different viewpoints with different people from all over the world, and you learn from those people as well as your teacher. It's just a great way to mature, like you were saying. And I think that if there's a way you can do it, you should, because there is a life after high school. And even if you don't use your degree for a career, just the experience, I think,
Yeah.
is totally worth it. But don't overpay for college. If you can go somewhere that's affordable, go for it. But anyway, this isn't
I'm
necessarily
very
a
old,
PSA
so
for
when I went to
college.
college, it was affordable. Like when I
Yes,
it was
yes.
expensive back then. I thought it was expensive then, but like now there's no way. Like
Oh,
it's
it's crazy.
it
Yeah, it's
needs to come
nuts.
down. There needs to be some regulations because this is getting out of control.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm actually I teach at some local universities here in Philadelphia, so I'm back in school, just on the other side of the desk.
Okay.
Um, but I'm a big, I guess I'm a Fred head, because after watching this documentary, my feeling, what I left this with was like, damn, I wish I knew this was being made back when it was originally being made, because I would have loved to have been part of it in some way. And watching you guys sit around the table, I was like, boy, I just, these guys are really great. I was like, I want to be part of this group. So I felt like I could relate to you, but I also, all of you are very likable, and you all have your own interesting story to tell. And yeah, just why do you think this documentary was so important and needed to be made? And it's produced by 4 women, which is great. Uh, more because when you look at the film and TV and things like that, men have just been in charge for a really long time. And did a few recent interviews with folks related to the Murder She Wrote world, and I talked about how Angela Lansbury back in the '90s took over Murder She Wrote, renegotiated her deal, knowing that she was the star of the show. And as part of that renegotiation, she basically said, "If you want me, then you need to give me ownership of the show." And they did that. And she and her family owned the show. And like, for a woman who was like middle aged in the '90s to be
Mhm.
running a production of one of the top rated TV shows is insane to think
Yeah.
about now. And today there are more women, Tina Fey, Amy Poehler, etc., who are just really kind of leading the charge, women of color, trans women. And it's awesome to see that. But I mean, for you guys, I mean, did you really think about that going into this, or did this just kind of happen naturally?
Um, First of all, thank you because I love that we're talking about this because I feel like we we as a community talk about women filmmakers and stuff like that, and for us, we're excited because we're 4 women who are in a space that is generally male dominated, and not only did we do this documentary, but we're successful with it. Like we keep selling out of the documentaries. Like every time they get it in stock, they can't keep it in stock. It keeps selling out. We were the #1 documentary for 3 weeks before our film released. And then for 2 weeks after that, we still were the #1. I think we just got knocked off the list yesterday. And so for me, I feel like that that is a huge thing for women filmmakers like in this space because there's other than I Am Nancy and Kira Gardner's documentary about Chucky living with Chucky. I don't really think there's that many female-led documentaries in the horror space right now. And so for us, when we launched, we just wanted to be friends telling a story. And originally, when we launched, it was myself, Kim Gunzinger, Deandra Laser, and then like our friends like Anthony Brownlee, Jeremy Todd Moorhead, and then my husband. Um, we all kind of like launched it together. But as the process started going on, Kim and I started taking a little more charge. We realized that not everybody can hone the direction and move things forward. Some people needed to move up and step up in positions. And so Kim and I stepped up, and then Deandra stepped up, and then we brought Crystal Van Etten on board. And she was like such a breath of fresh air for us to bring onto the project. And we started a group chat, and what started to happen was the four of us just started to like work in this like synergy. And it just felt like, I call it lightning in a bottle. Like it just felt like magic. And so we didn't intentionally go into it with it being produced by four women, but halfway through, that's what it turned into. And I don't think that if we would have had the team that we have, the four of us, we would have the project that we have. And everything that we did was very much guided by thought and care for the community, and thought and care for these stories that like these vulnerable stories that were sent to us. And so for us, it then became important to say like, hey, this is what we're doing, and we're four women in a space that is not normally welcoming to four women in a space. And so that's just, it kind of turned into that. And that's one of the things that I'm personally the most proud about in this documentary.
Yeah, that's really awesome, and congratulations on that. I work, or have worked, primarily in public relations most of my life. I don't really anymore. I'm more of a writer and teacher now. But I remember people would always ask me, "Oh, what's it like working with so many women?" Because PR is dominated by women. And I
Mhm.
was like, I don't really. I thought it was a weird question. Like, for example, like I was raised by my two dads, and people would be like, "What's it like having a gay father?" I don't know. He's my father, right? Like, I don't necessarily think of things that way. I just think of it like, oh, well, my boss happens to be a woman. Like, whatever. Like, I don't care what her gender is. I just care, does she treat me well?
Right.
But it's funny that, yes, some people do. I see people for people, but obviously, I think it's also good to recognize, um, the glass ceilings, right, and the barriers that certain people have to break through, and that I'm lucky, right? Like, I'm a white guy, right? I remember working at the grocery store and someone coming up to me and assuming that I ran the store. They thought I was the manager just because I
Right.
was white and I had my hair combed and I had put a little cologne on or something. But had I been black, guaranteed no one would have said that, because they would have assumed that I worked there. I mean, these are
Oh
just
yeah.
assumptions that people have. And you're right, I guess in horror and just film and television and all that, it can be really hard to kind of, for people to kind of break those habits. And whether, and I doubt that they're doing it out of, like I said, being malicious, but it's just like, um,
It's out of that
keeping
social conditioning that we have, that like men
right,
seem to believe. We experienced this on Fredheads. We had some team members who were with us when we were filming certain events, and myself and this one team member who's no longer on our team, we went to go like set everything up with the convention, and say, hey, okay, we're here, this is what we're doing, we need to get our passes. And they were just strictly talking to him, and he was
uh,
kind of like a little confused by it. And so I kept interjecting, and then they kept like answering to him. And so then they actually then said to him, so your project is this? And I looked at them and I said, this is my project. Like, he's with me. And then it felt very much like a, oh, okay. And so then the conversation shifted, but it wasn't malicious, like you said, in any way. It's just they're so conditioned to think that if a man and a woman are standing there, the man is the one who's in charge. And I'm
that,
not on this project at all. So
exactly. And you know what? I was in charge of the diversity and inclusion committee at the law firm I used to work for. And this is absolutely implicit bias, right? It's where people kind of are conditioned a certain way and they don't even realize they have a
right.
bias. It's just part of their behavior. It's baked in. And that's why it's so important for companies and, or just people, just to learn on their own that, oh, how am I being like, I mean, not to get into a whole thing. Actually, I did an interview with a great guy, David Livermore, about uh, race, and we talked about white privilege and things like that. And white privilege is something that's totally misunderstood. So, if
Oh yeah.
you guys are watching this, go check that out after you watch all this interview, because that's just fascinating stuff. But yeah, again, these are the types of things you could be learning in college. They're just fascinating to discuss. And good for you guys for setting that example for, because I hope other women or girls, young girls, watch this documentary and say, look at them, they did it, I can do it. Right? It's really, most of the time when people accomplish great things, it's not because they're special. It's just because they said, what if, why not? And then they take the first step. I'm sure when you took this first step, and tell me about that, how long did it take from concept to completion for this documentary? And when you started it, looking back on it now at the finish line, I mean, did you ever think you would make it to where you are right now?
No, not at all. I didn't think that we would make it here. We started, so the idea started in 2016. My friends and I had made a film called Don't Fall Asleep with Heather Langenkamp, and she narrated Nancy from Beyond the Grave. It's like a short film. And we wanted to do that as like a thank you to the Nightmare on Elm Street community and to like the Nancy Thompson fans, because like clearly we're all huge Nancy fans. And so we thought, how much fun would that be? So we made a film in 2016. We threw it up on YouTube, and we were kind of teeter-tottering on like, what do we do next? Because we got the bug. Like, we want to like make films now. We want to like tell stories. And we were working on a video pitch for a feature film that never came to fruition. And in the midst of that, I watched a documentary on another fandom, and it was on like Netflix or something. And it was really good. And I left that documentary thinking like, wow, like that was so good. Like I didn't know people would be interested in that type of site. I was like, why is nobody doing one on like our community on A Nightmare on Elm Street? And Deandra and I had done like cosplaying for years, where we were costuming different characters from the Nightmare universe. And one of the times we were costuming, Sci-Fi was filming that Heroes of Cosplay or whatever TV show, and they had come to a convention to scout potentially doing one about the horror side, and nothing ever came of it. And so all those little ideas that like were like, okay, there was interest here and there was interest here, like, but nothing ever happened. Like, let's do it. Let's be the ones to tell this community story, tell this side of the fandom, show what it's really like to go to conventions, and make it be not what people think, because we don't really know what people thought about conventions. We just knew what we thought about conventions, whether they're scary to walk into, or whether they're fun, or it's just people walking around. Like, we wanted to really show like what we knew the heart of it was. And so we in 2016 had the conversation. I said to Dee and Kim and Anthony and them, and I just said, this is really what I want to do. And in Never Sleep Again, Tommy Hudson's amazing documentary, somebody casually called us Fred heads. I think that like Robert coined that term or something, where he like nicknamed us the Fred heads, but it didn't like stick. And I was like, and we just call it Fred heads. Like, let's honor everything. Let's honor like Never Sleep Again. Let's honor the community. Let's honor all of this. And they were like, yes, 100%. Like, they were like, let's do this. And from the time that we announced it in 2016, we started rolling film in 2017. And from 2017, we filmed for a year. We had a little bit of a hiccup, took a pause, and then we lost all of our footage that we had filmed that prior year. And then that's when Kim and I took control and said, listen, if we're going to move forward and if this is what we're going to do, we have to take a major reset. We rebranded, we came out with a new logo. We eventually got a new poster, and we said, let's charge forward and do this. And so we filmed for another year and a half. And then we were setting up some interviews in LA, and COVID hit. And when COVID hit, we just kind of were like, okay, this might be the perfect time for us to go through the footage and just see what we have, so we can strategically plan in 2 weeks when the world opens back up to like go to LA. And so we started going through the footage, and 2 weeks obviously turned into a year and some change that the world was closed. And so when we started going through the footage, we realized that we didn't need to go to LA anymore and do these bigger interviews that we originally had planned. We realized that the story was there, and the story was with the people and what they sent. We thought people were going to send their collections, we thought people were going to say what their favorite death kill was or who their favorite character was. And while we got a couple of those things, most of the people talked about seeing A Nightmare on Elm Street through the lens of the hero, Nancy. And a lot of them talked about seeing it as an analogy for survival, and that they used it for coping. And so in all, it took us, if we wouldn't have had that hiccup in 2017, it probably would have only taken us like 2 or 3 years to really fully do everything, because we had to edit for a year and then we shopped it around a little bit. And so it would have taken 3 years, but it truly did take the full like 4 or 5 years to make this documentary. And it was a major learning lesson. Our next one will not be this long. So.
Oh, that's impressive. And the fact that you had to overcome adversity, because some people would say, screw it, we lost our footage, let's just, close up shop. But you said,
Yeah.
no, we're going to persevere. We're going to, take charge and just make it happen. So good for you.
Well, I was that person. So I felt when we got hit with something big, and when it happened and we lost everything, we couldn't use any of the footage anymore. We were at I think it was a horror hound convention, and they've been so great to us. And I was standing in line to meet Neve Campbell, who I'd never met, and I'm a huge Scream fan. And I was done. I was having a conversation with my film partner, Kim Gunzinger, and I was just kind of saying like, I think I'm done. I think I'm tapped out. I don't know if I can continue on doing this. I was like, well, you can totally take the lead on this, and I'll step back and I'll help in whatever way you can. I'm not going to abandon you guys or anything, but I'm at a loss, and I just don't think I can keep going on. And she was like, you have to do what's best for you and your mental health. We're literally deep in this conversation, and this 9-year-old little boy comes over to us and taps me and says, "Excuse me, is this you?" And pulls his phone and shows me a photo of me and him from 2015. And this was in like, I think 2017 or 18 when this happened. And it's me and him, and I'm in costume, and he's got the biggest smile on his face. And I'm like shocked. And I was like, "Yeah, that's me." And he's like, "Okay." And he like runs away. And we just start laughing. I was like, "Okay, that was so cute." His sister drags him back over and says, he looks up to you guys so much because of your costuming, and he's so excited about your documentary. He's excited about Fred heads. It's all he talks about. Like, so she was saying all of this stuff for him, and he was so shy. And so Kim and I looked at him, and I was like, "Can I give you a hug?" Like, and he's like, "Okay." So I like gave him a hug. I'm like digging in my bag, like, what Fred heads merch do I have with me? He left, and I looked at her, and she says to me, "You're really gonna stop now? Like, this is like, after that, like, and I was like, I can't stop now. Like, the universe sent that kid to me to give me that reminder of why I wanted to do the documentary in the first place. And so we did, and then we did another filming event, and he showed up at that filming event, and he's in the documentary for a smidge because it's just B-roll. Because nobody really had the camera on running when it happened, because I was so shocked when he was there. But I love that we put that little, like a little nugget. So if he's watching it at any point, he's going to see himself and be like, "Oh my gosh," and he has no clue. So for me, like, that little boy, like, essentially saved our documentary. There were a couple points that saved our documentary, and he was one of them for sure.
Wow, that's fantastic. Yeah, it was one of my favorite people to listen to is Mel Robbins, just kind of a self-help person. And she was talking about that, about you have to kind of pay attention to if you have all these signs around you about certain things that you're thinking about, related to your life. And it's some sort of positive decision, but you're just not sure, should I do it? Shouldn't I do it? And you keep seeing these signs, like that's pretty much, yeah, like the universe telling you, just do it, right? Don't procrastinate, get it done, go for it. It'll be worth the effort.
Yeah.
So
Thank
I'm
God.
glad, yeah, you did that, and hopefully you'll get to sign a copy for him next time you see him.
Yes.
So speaking of that, so yeah, the physical copies are available now. Are you guys planning at all any sort of a digital release as well? Just curious, for anyone watching.
Yeah, so a lot of that is out of our control. We sold into distribution in 2021, and then that distribution company ended up folding, and they sold to Bayview Entertainment. And Bayview has been so amazing to us. They came in and like, they're like, "We are huge Freddy fans ourselves," and they're like, "We believe in this project." And so they knew that like it had been getting sat on for like a year. where essentially like nothing was done with it. And they knew like we were promised everything and promised the moon and nothing was delivered. And so they said, let's release the DVD. Like, let's get this out there. The fans are clamoring for it. They're clamoring for more, as Bob Shea would say in New Nightmare.
That's where my mind went.
Yeah, that's instantly like that. I quote it all the time. I quote Nightmare too much, but so they're like, let's release the DVD and kind of just get this buzz out there and kind of squelch a little bit of the need for it. While they were doing that, they were working on our streaming distribution deal. There's been a couple things where people have wanted to stream ours, a couple streaming services. I'm trying to be very cautious on what I say for legalities. There have been several streaming sites that are very known that were interested in it, but that's not up to us. Like that's between the distribution company and them. And so we've asked for updates on some of the stuff, and one of them, they were like, we don't know if we're going to do this deal. So they're like, we'll have a decision in March. We'll let you know. So we're like, everything that we know is what we tell the public. We're very transparent. So we're hopeful that it'll be streaming. We know that one way or another, it will be on VOD, which is the video on demand. So one way or another, people will either be able to purchase it digitally, or it'll be streaming on a streaming service or something. So we're not sure. That's
Right.
the culmination of a long answer.
No, it's good. But I encourage people, hey, if you want to ensure that happens, buy yourself a hard copy. That'll, obviously increase the demand and show to those that are being negotiated with, look how popular it is. So
Right.
that can only benefit everyone. So yeah, I have my hard copy. I think it's actually coming tomorrow. So, or no, it might be next week, but it's definitely coming very soon. So I'm looking forward to
I
that.
appreciate
Yeah. And then well, actually I want to share my Freddy story real quick, if that's
Yeah.
okay. So my background is that I think the first time I ever became aware of Freddy is two things happened. One is I was at the Wiz in Moorestown, New Jersey, which is like this like electronics chain that's probably no longer around. And I saw the VHS of New Nightmare, which has this amazing artwork on it, where you've got Freddy with claw, and then I think below is Nancy and Dylan in front of like the oven. It's just like gorgeous, and also like to a kid you're like, whoa, what is this? So I bought it, and that was the first movie I watched in the series, and it's still my favorite because I love how intellectual it is and meta, and the acting's wonderful. I love the soundtrack, just everything about it. I just thought it was just phenomenal, and I like to say that I loved it before loving it was cool.
Mhm.
Now everyone's like, oh, okay, it's cool to say that you love that movie. Where back then everyone's like, oh, the first and the third were the best. And I was like, no, New Nightmare is the best, and then one, and then three, and so on and so forth. But that was my entry into the series, which is kind of interesting that it was like number 7. And then I remember my dad telling me that, oh, the original Nightmare on Elm Street's the bloodiest movie ever. You can't watch that. And I'm like, well, now I have to watch that because he said he hyped it up. So I went and I watched it, and I was like, it's not that bad. And I enjoyed it, and it's much more obviously darker and grittier, and it's got its own feel. But I just like the James Bond movies and other franchises that I love, or just like a good musician with a bunch of different albums, I can always find something to appreciate. So even though, like, let's say probably Dream Child and Freddy's Dead are probably the weakest,
Right.
there's still things in those movies that I think are fun. And if you go into them not as like some sort of like critic or intellectual, and you just say, hey, I'm just going to have fun, then there's something in there for you, whether it's a one-liner, a death, a character, the story, whatever it is. There's just always something to appreciate. So I mean, yeah, New Nightmare is my entry, and then I went and watched one, but Dream Master is pretty amazing too. That's kind of like the ultimate MTV type Freddy film, just from the aesthetic to the music. I mean, everything, and the waterbed death scene. I was like, as a kid, that and the junkyard kill, I was like, that was crazy, right? I mean, just just the way Robert like did like the claw and just like killed him in the junkyard was insane. And then the
Robert.
waterbed scene, like as a child, I was
Yeah.
just like, and I remember I got in trouble with the babysitter. I was watching Dream Master. I said something to her, and that must have pissed her off. And she's like, "Go to bed." And I was like, "Oh no, it's in the middle of the movie. Like I can't finish it." But I mean, obviously, I'm going on and on about my favorite stuff related to Freddy. But what about you? Are there certain uh, film where you came in, or certain ones that you really remember or have a soft, a fond memory of?
I love them all. I in the documentary talk about how I was introduced like because of Dream Warriors, and then like how I saw like the original. But there was a story in the documentary that I told that got cut out for time, and it was about New Nightmare. New Nightmare. My favorite changes between New Nightmare and Dream Warriors just depending on the mood that I'm in. But like I'd say probably for the past year and a half, 2 years, New Nightmare has been like the solid favorite of mine. But I saw New Nightmare in theaters. I think like 7 or 8 when it came out. I don't know. I was young and my grandfather had just passed away. And all I was looking forward to was seeing New Nightmare. And my uncle who introduced A Nightmare on Elm Street to me tells his son, who's my godbrother, who's in the documentary, to go downstairs and get Paige. And so Brad comes downstairs. He's like, my dad says he wants to talk to you. I think you're in trouble. And so I'm like scared. I'm like, oh my God. And so I go upstairs and he like grabs my shoulders and he directs me. And he sits me in front of the TV and he says, sit. And I'm like, okay. And so he puts, I remember that I've never even seen the movie. And I remember the VHS from Blockbuster. It was called Man's Best Friend. And he put it in the VHS player and he's like, now watch. And I was like, okay. And he watches, and all of a sudden you hear Heather's voice. And I realize, oh shit, I'm watching Nancy on screen. And as a kid, you don't realize it's Heather and it's all you think it's Nancy because it's all you know. And so I'm watching and I'm like, I start freaking out. I start crying. And I was like, play it again, play it again. And so I made him like play it over and over and over again. So that whole year, all I could do was wait for it. It was the only thing I was looking forward to was seeing in theaters. And my grandfather had just passed away, and it was kind of like a really like dark time. And it was right around my birthday. And I remember I came home from school and it was the release day. And the house was like pitch black, and my mom was like in her room, like really depressed and sad. Her dad had just died, and that was her best friend. And I looked at my dad and I just said, I was like, can we please go see New Nightmare? Like I really just want to see this. And I was like, I don't want to be here. I was like a little kid. I was like, I don't want to be here. Like, and so my mom is like, please just take her, like, let her enjoy this. I was the only kid in the theater. It was packed. And I was like this the whole time staring at the screen. It was the first time I'd ever seen one on the big screen. And it was like, for me, the most influential thing I feel like in my life. I got to watch my hero kick Freddy's ass like one last time. Like, and so for me, it was just another momentum in my life that just kept telling me to keep going. Like New Nightmare for me was so powerful in symbolism because here is this woman who, yes, it's a character that she's playing, but like everything is continuously getting stripped from her. And now they're coming after her son, the most important thing for her. And she's like, no, I'm going to fight. I'm going to continue to fight. And I know that it was just as a kid, I thought it was Heather Langenkamp. And I was like, not only is she like Nancy and Nancy doing this, but the girl who plays her does this. And so that helped me go on in life. I remember after seeing New Nightmare, I went home and I wrote Heather Langenkamp this 3-page letter. And I was like, I need to send it. Her name was misspelled and all of that stuff. And I was like, I need to send her this. I need to send her this. And so my dad took me to the library and I like asked, like, do you have any books on like celebrity addresses or New Line Cinema? And I got New Line Cinema's address. For some crazy reason, her management was in a book. It like said like Nightmare on Elm Street who managed these people. And I found the information. I sent them the letter and I never heard anything. And I asked her, she never got the letter. But like as a kid, like that movie just was so impactful for me. And like seeing it get so much love today, Like, I love it. I love that people are discovering New Nightmare and realizing how great it was. And I always say New Nightmare, there would be no Scream without New Nightmare. Like, New Nightmare set that precedent of what a meta horror film really is and what it should be. And after it bombed, Wes was done. Like, Wes was done with horror films. He was kind of burnt out, and I think he turned down Scream several times before he finally was like, okay, I'll do it. And when he did it, he put a lot of his influence in it and a lot of Nightmare influence in it. Like, even with the casting of like Nev Campbell and Steve Ulrich, like they look like Heather Langenkamp and Johnny Depp. The way he had certain shots set up was very mimicking A Nightmare on Elm Street. And so to me, like, New Nightmare sets the precedent of what an amazing film really is. And J. Peter Robinson's score is so incredibly beautiful, and it's haunting, and I can hear it in my head right now as I'm talking about it. And to me, New Nightmare is the best film in the entire Nightmare universe. But I always say, if we're doing canon storyline, it's got to be Dream Warriors for me. Like, Dream Warriors just is peak Freddy. Like, Dream Warriors and Dream Master go hand to hand. Like, if you could watch Dream Warriors into Dream Master, it's a perfect like combination. But I feel like that's just like such peak Freddy is just Dream Warriors, and it's the 36th anniversary of it. So I love it. I think this whole franchise is amazing.
Yeah, and as we're recording this, yesterday was, right, like you said, 36 years ago yesterday, it was
Yeah.
released, Dream Warriors. I was actually at the God, I think it was the 30th anniversary. They were showing it here in Philly, and Heather was there. So was the director, and so was Don Dokken, performing Dream Warriors acoustically. And I was like, and I like got a photo with Heather with a beer, and I'm like, this is crazy. I'm just hanging out with Heather Langenkamp and the director, watching Dream Warriors. Don Dokken is here. Like, well, this is pretty amazing.
That's
And that was the same day as, I think it was, Wizard World. So Heather was at the convention. I got to do a little like quick interview with her at the convention, and then that night we went and did that thing, um, which was just incredible. So it was just yeah, it's amazing. And as you're talking about New Nightmare, I was just thinking about all the amazing lines from that movie. Um, God, I mean, what probably my favorite moment in the movie is when, well, not my favorite moment, but kind of the moment where I get pumped up is at the end when John Saxon shows up and they have the shot of him, and then she's, fully kind of like,
calling me Nancy, John. Why are you calling
yes,
me Nancy? Yeah.
right. And then all of a sudden you see the badge and you're like, and she's like, what was it? I love you too, daddy. And then you're like, okay, here we go. We're off to the climax. And
The
then,
pajamas.
yeah, and the scene when she just, slugs Fred, fuck you.
Yes, in the theaters, everyone
Now,
went nuts. Everybody went nuts when that happened in the theaters. People jumped to their feet, they cheered. Like, that memory is forever embedded in my brain when he's like, pick a pet for the Rugrat, bitch. And she's like,
yes,
you. Like, yes. Oh my God, yes.
just amazing lines. The breadcrumbs. I mean, there's just so many
The freeway
great
scene.
moments.
The freeway scene is the most amazing scene, where she like runs out on the freeway and like the semi comes, and then she gets hit by the car and she like tumbles. Like, it's like an action hero. Like, Nancy's like an action hero.
Yeah, and I know that Wes probably wasn't the biggest fan of his acting, but the scene between him and Heather, where he's like, are you willing to play Nancy one last time? And then they show the computer with basically what was just said. I was like, that's so cool. Like, what a great moment. I just love that. But yeah, this just as like a writer, a fan, a horror fan, I just feel like it's so well done that it's just incredible. And I'm just so delighted that he gave us that. And for me, the first Freddy film that I saw on screen was Freddy versus Jason, which was so fun because it was literally like being at like a pro wrestling event or something. Like, people are like yelling, to go, fuck him up, Freddy, kick his ass, Jason. And I'm just like, this is so fun. Like, people are just like, how much fun is this to see live? Did you see it in the theater as well?
I did. I saw it opening day. I got press passes for me and my godbrother, and we went. It was like a huge event in Chicago. It was so much fun. and we saw it, and the theater was just roaring. It's a truly great popcorn flick to like just have fun with and experience. It felt like the Rocky Horror Picture Show because everybody was like cheering and throwing stuff, and it was like the best. It was so much fun.
And yeah, that's the thing. I think that people is like if you're not a horror fan, you're missing out on a lot of fun. So I highly encourage you to find like what type of horror do you enjoy? Is it whether it's more suspense or gory stuff, or I mean there's just so many different subgenres, and it's God, there's something for everyone. But to be able to be part of that, whether it's at a convention or in a theater, or just making friends and having these conversations with them, it's just like you guys mentioned this in the film about like finding your tribe, and I find that with lots of fandom. Like I'm a Kiss fan, that's its own tribe. It's a hell of a tribe. Same thing with horror. Um, I think that's what's really cool about the internet. As bad as social media can be with bullying and all of that, if you kind of find your tribe, whoever that is, and you surround yourself with those people, um, people who build you up, don't tear you down.
Right.
That can really help you feel seen and heard and understood. And I think that this movie is a big part of that, is letting people know that like there's lots of other people out there who are just like you, like you're not alone.
Right.
um and I think that's such an important message, and your story in the film was the most impactful. I was waiting for it because not that I knew what was going to be said, but for those watching this, the way the movie goes is like that. We have like the online submissions from the people. You have obviously interviews that you did at conventions, but then throughout you have all of the people who directly contributed to the film kind of sitting around a table, and we get to hear all of their stories throughout, like their Freddy story and how they became a fan, what it means to them. And Paige, your story, I was just like sitting there like oh my God, wow, like this is like I was so moved by your story. I'm not sure how much you'd like to share about it, but I just think it's incredible what you overcame. And yeah, I mean, it's up to you. Obviously, I don't want to pressure you, but is
Yeah,
there
I'll talk
anything
about
you'd like
anything.
to share
I'm an
about?
open book. When you're editing this for 2 years, staring at your story, listening to your story for 2 years, you kind of start to become a little desensitized to it. Like it helps
Yeah,
me like therapy wise. So I'm an open book. Ask anything you want, anything you want to know.
yeah. So I mean, yeah, with I mean, obviously, people who haven't watched it yet don't know what the hell I'm referencing, but I mean, you're like you mentioned bullying earlier. So obviously you were bullied to a certain extent in school. Um, and then that kind of drove you to like a really dark moment where I mean literally like Dream Warriors and Nancy and Freddy and like these stories just helped you say, hey, my story needs to continue. So I mean, could you kind of tell us about that, and
Yeah.
what inspired you just to keep pushing forward?
So so originally I was really nervous about telling my story in the documentary. I knew it was going to be really heavy, and um, Anthony Brownlee, who's in the documentary, has a very similar story to mine, but also the polar opposite of mine. And we had a conversation where he and I just both kind of agreed to just be incredibly vulnerable. And um, it was more like, okay, if you share your story and you be vulnerable, I'll share my story and I'll be vulnerable. And I filmed mine first in the documentary before anybody else. The way that I was the way Kim and I had it structured, my story had to go first. And I was joking because I was like, you guys know I'm gonna cry. So throughout the whole rest of the documentary and everybody else's stories, I'm gonna have like cry face. And they're like, no, we'll take time and like touch everything up. And I was like, okay. But I feel like my story is really heavy. And so for me, you know, I just felt like a very like misunderstood kid. I was different from everybody else. I was incredibly like outgoing. They say like I burst out of my mom's womb like radiating sunshine and loudness and laughter and music and dancing. And so I was like the oddball kid. I was always into like theater. I was always into like acting. I was always into trying to like be something else. And I think that kids just don't like that. They don't like seeing somebody who kind of knows who they are in a way. And I had a lot of friends early on in school, and then when my grandfather got sick in third, I was in third grade, my grandfather got sick, and I ended up missing a lot of school. We had just moved to a new area, and my mom was incredibly close with her family, so I never really had time to fully like form friendships because we were constantly back in like the neighborhood I grew up in. And so all of my friends were those people, but in school I didn't really have a whole lot of friends. And I had this one girlfriend, and we were close from first to third grade. And when my grandfather got sick, I was missing a lot of school. And she went around telling like a lot of stories and a lot of like lies and a lot of things that, little kids do. And my grandfather died. And when he died, I ended up missing, I think, like 2 or 3 months of school. It was really rough, for all of us. Me in particular, and my mom, it was incredibly rough. And so when I came back to school, that same girl who I thought was my friend, who I was like talking to the entire time, and just being a little kid, you're a little kid, went around and told everybody that I was the one that died. And when I came back to school, I don't know why it like flipped. They were calling me like a zombie. I was reading like goosebump books, and they're like, there she is again. She's a zombie. Look at her. She's into all that death and horror stuff. They started calling me Freddy Krueger because they knew that I was into like a Nightmare on Elm Street. And they just became popular because they were the mean girls that then had somebody to pick on. And so that's what happened. So in third grade, I lost all of my friends. This one random boy in my neighborhood became my friend, and I joke that he was my first love. And like we were friends, and then he moved away when I was in sixth grade. And so I went into middle school in sixth grade with like no real friends and no real like security system. And I was already like getting bullied, and it wasn't too bad until I got to middle school. And when I got to middle school, it was like an eye-opening culture shock for me. And I don't know what it was that they just honed in and picked on me. I was little, I was small, and I was poor. My parents moved to like more of like an upper middle class area, and like, well, we weren't upper middle class at all still, so we were still like poor. Like my mom worked at a grocery store, like, and that's not to like discredit any of that, but like these people were all driving like BMWs and had horses and all of this stuff. And I think that they just honed in on here's this little girl who's different, and they just barraged me. And my parents were constantly trying to like tell the school district, like our daughter's gonna die. Like you're not helping our kid. And they would tell my parents, like, we don't have a bullying problem. Maybe it's just her. Maybe this isn't the right school for her. And my mom like just got to a point that she just had like enough, and she just was like, whatever you got to do. And this was after I attempted suicide, so spoiler alert for those in the documentary. I talk about it a little bit in the documentary, but I attempted suicide at 12. And after that, my parents were just kind of like fed up. They were like, this is it. And so I started like recording like them, like on like a tape recorder to like prove it. And like that, we got in trouble for that because we were recording without permission. It was a nightmare for me. And my only real escape were A Nightmare on Elm Street and Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Those were the two things that were my escape, because Buffy had started airing at that time. And the two of them really do correlate and go hand to hand, because they both have these strong female heroes who are essentially for the underdog and for people who aren't accepted. And so for me, when I would watch Dream Warriors, I watched Dream Warriors probably every day from when my grandpa passed away, every day up until probably the middle of high school. Like even if it was just putting it on at night and going to sleep with it. And I still have the VHS tape at my parents' house. And so in middle school, like that was my survival. It was the whole like, what would Nancy do? Like Nancy would die on the sword for these people. She gave her life for these people, for these kids. And Nancy would just continue to fight, and she wouldn't give up. And that really just truly resonated with me in a way that saved my life, because it was seeing that VHS tape and the VCR and recognizing like, hey, that you shouldn't be doing this. And so when I did, I stood up and then obviously I like went into my mom's room just crying and was like, please help me, like, please. And that's the moment my parents were like, we're done. And, so that's why I didn't go to high school. It sucks. And I hope, I hope that maybe some of my childhood bullies stumble across this someday and see it and realize that even though we were children, that maybe we should teach the next generation to not be this way because it's so detrimental. And not everybody is as lucky as me. Not everybody is as lucky to have found A Nightmare on Elm Street and to have now found the group of people that I have found that have become my family. And I know that I am incredibly appreciative of it and very like grateful for A Nightmare on Elm Street and Heather Langenkamp and Nancy Thompson and Wes Craven. So that's kind of my story. That's my thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's just incredible. And yeah, I mean, just to literally be like at death's door and to just turn things around like that. I mean, yeah, I'm sorry you had to go through that, but I'm glad that you're still here, right? And that you fought through it, and that your parents, fought for you as well. That's just, yeah, people need to realize that, and I understand like how bullies might get, like I used to impersonate teachers in high school, right? And if you make people laugh, it's like you're the class clown. So you're like, okay, they like me. I'll do more of that, right?
Mhm.
And that's one thing if you're impersonating a teacher, but if you're like making fun of another kid or bullying
Yeah.
them, you're getting that same type of like dopamine hit. They're doing it for that reason, probably because they're like, oh, it makes me popular, it makes people like me. But yeah, at what expense, right? I think like that's the thing to keep in mind is that it's one thing to talk like a teacher,
I
it's
mean,
another thing to tell.
I had teachers bullying me. I by seventh grade, my depression had gotten so bad I had gained like 150 pounds.
Wow.
And so I had teachers bullying me about my weight. I had an art teacher who would tell me every day, make sure that you be cautious when you're sitting in that chair because I can't afford a new one when you break it. And you're 12 years old and you're a 12-year-old girl and like this is getting told to you, it's like detrimental. I had another teacher who this one girl went up to her and said, so and so said my outfit is tacky, and she was like upset and she's like, that's not tacky, and she pointed to me and she goes, this is tacky. And I was like, okay, like I like that was, it happened all the time. I remember I was in 8th grade and I did a project. We had to do this project where we talked about like our best friends. And I did it on my sister. I have a sister who's a couple of years younger than me. She's my best friend in the entire world. She's been my best friend since she was born. And I did like this whole thing on it. And the kids in that, when I presented it, bullied me so bad, were making fun of me, laughing at me. And I just was like looking to the teacher, like, are you going to say anything? And I look at her and she's snickering and laughing. And I walked out of the class crying and went down to the guidance counselor. And the guidance counselor told me that I was overreacting. The same one who told me she didn't have time for me. She told me that I was overreacting. And then I left her office and walked right to the principal's office. And I started crying, and the principal started, saying stuff to me and started kind of being like, you're a big girl, you need to stop crying. You're embarrassing yourself, all of this stuff. And then I said, you need to put my mom on the phone right now. And they said, no, you're a big girl, you can handle this. We're going to talk about this. You don't need your mommy. And I said, put my mom on the fucking phone right now. And so they then called my mom and they thought my mom was going to be on their side. And my mom cussed them out and was like, I'm leaving work right now. I'm coming to pick her up. If you say another word to my child when I get there, I will beat your ass. And she's like, like my mom was so upset. So for me, like it was even teachers who did it to me. And I didn't feel safe at all. And Nightmare on Elm Street is what made me feel safe. It was comfort. It was my best friend. It was the only thing that I had that I could come home to and see a bunch of other young people like Kristen and Sheila, who was like me. I had glasses and I was an asthma, and seeing these young kids fighting for survival against this unseen evil that nobody believed them. Nobody believed that these kids were going through all this. All the parents, like, look at Elaine Parker. She's like, oh, whatever. It was when I took her credit cards away. Like, nobody believed these kids. And that is what resonated with me so much. And seeing that strong figure of Nancy Thompson being that leader, and that a woman could lead, a woman could do this. It was so inspirational. And when we did the documentary, everybody was saying the same thing. And that, to me, just made me realize how that little kid might have been so alone in that moment, but in the world, we're not alone. We're all here. We're all going through it. And that's why it's so important that my story was featured, and that I am glad that I sucked it up and told it, because I hope that it helps somebody someday. I hope that somebody sees this and is like, wow, at our premiere, we had somebody come up to us who's a friend, and he said, I wasn't expecting this in the documentary. I wasn't expecting this at all. And he's like, but my daughter is 12 years old, and she's kind of going through a lot of the stuff that you went through. And he's like, I kind of want to go home and have a conversation with her now. And I was like, I had like the biggest smile on my face. I gave him like a hug. I was like, thank you for that. Like, if that's the only thing that comes from this documentary, then I feel complete. I feel whole. And so, sorry, I know I ramble.
No. As a parent of like a child who's about to turn 6 months, I started to get nervous because I'm thinking like, oh my God, like when I was in school, I didn't even have a cell phone. There was no such thing as social media. And now there's like, you hear about kids getting drugs on Snapchat and like delivered to home, and then they overdose and die. And I'm just like, oh my God, what am I going to, I put them in a bubble? Like, how do you protect them from
Right.
bullying? All these things. But I think like for you, the big thing there was you had, as far as I can tell, like really good parents.
Mhm.
Thank God for that, because um, some people don't have that support system at home, and it's just as bad at home or worse. And I feel horrible for them because, like, each child is born like pretty much like, I want to say perfect, but like I feel like we're all born without any of like at his point right now, like he's loved by everyone, right? He's at an age where everyone loves him. He doesn't know hate. He doesn't know
Right.
bullying. He doesn't know these negative things. And then as you get older and you kind of make your way through the world, these negative things kind of come at you. So you need to have that support system to try to protect you, educate you, and make you feel like you're enough to
Right.
withstand this. And it's horrible that anyone has to go through it, but if your story can save one life, 10 lives, 10,000 lives, whatever it is, then it's worth sharing. So thank you for sharing it here and for in the documentary.
Well, thank you for enjoying the documentary. Like, I thought two people would watch it, and I've had such a fear that people wouldn't understand it or get it. And I think that a lot of that fear has gone down now, since more reviews and stuff have come out. And even at our premiere, we had some people stand up and say that they felt seen for the first time in their life. And for me, I was like, okay, people are getting it. I had a fear people weren't going to get it. I thought people were going to be like, where's the collections? Where's this? Where's that? And like, I was like, they're not going to get it. They're gonna think it's too sappy. They're gonna think it's too, it's not horror enough. But it's been the exact opposite of that. So I appreciate people like you who have watched it and enjoyed it, because it solidifies what we did. So
Yeah. Just winding down, I'm just curious about, did you have any great memories or stories you wanted to share about experiences either meeting Robert England or Heather Langenkamp, or both, or others from the films that really just kind of stayed with you for whatever reason?
my interaction with all of them has been great. Like, every single Nightmare Star is incredibly genuine and giving and so gracious. And I am very like appreciative for my friendship with each and every certain one of them on the different aspects. Like, I like Toy Newkirk and I are really close. I love Toy. I joke that she's my dog's godmother. I love them so much. Like, every interaction has been great with them. And I have favorites from each of them, but I have to say one of my favorite memories with any Nightmare Star is Clue Gallagher, who's no longer with us. He played Jesse's dad in part two, and he was at a convention, and I just was like, okay, I got to meet Clue. It was like the last day, and I was so tired. And Tuesday and I were cracking jokes and all this stuff again. I was like, I got to go meet Clue. And so I go over to meet Clue, and he's sitting there eating chocolate ice cream. And he says to me, he goes, I was wondering when you were going to come over and say hi to me, because I had been hanging out with all the Nightmare on Elm Street stars. And so I was like, I don't know, I was just really nervous. Clue, you're a legend. And he's like, I'm not a legend. I'm your grandpa now. Sit down. And so he had me sit behind the table with him, and I had such a great conversation with him. He was asking me like what I wanted to do, and I was like, I really want to be a filmmaker someday. And he was just cracking jokes. And then he's like, come on, he goes, come on, honey, you need some chocolate ice cream in you. He's like, you're looking a little weak. And so he kept trying to feed me like his chocolate ice cream, and everyone's cracking up laughing, and I'm dying with laughter, and he's making funny faces. And he I don't know, just was like such a bright light of like sunshine, and just so funny. That moment, I'm so thankful I have that moment, because he's no longer here with us. And I loved that moment so much. Just him trying to spoon feed me chocolate ice cream was the best. And I got up and I was like, Jesse's dad is my grandpa. I was like, so is Jesse my dad? Like I was like, like it was such a great moment. That's probably, with all of the Nightmare Stars, that's probably one of my favorite moments. I have a few with Heather, but they're very deeply personal. Heather has been, I feel like Heather has like watched us grow up. Heather has been such an amazing inspiration and like mentor for a lot of us. And so all of my moments with her are really great, and I'm very like appreciative, and I hold them very like close to the heart. She's given me tons of great advice and stuff. But I feel like for my favorite moment, it for sure is Clue.
He was one of the best parts of that movie. Jesse, just the way he would say it was just hilarious. And that movie in itself, obviously, there's a whole documentary that Mark Patton put out there, Scream Queen, which is really good,
Oh yeah.
and I encourage people to watch that. I mean, it's just amazing when you look at this franchise, because it speaks to so many marginalized groups, right? I mean, gay, trans, black, white, male, female. I feel like for whatever reason, and actually, you know what? There's this. Well, there's it's on Shutter, and I forget the name, but there's a show or a documentary about like queer horror,
It's
and
called Krueger.
it talks about how the gay community can see themselves in monsters, because monsters are kind of shunned, right? Monsters are kind of seen as the other, right? Oh, we have to hate the other because it's not like us. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting that people who deal, and I guess you could say people who deal with bullying, people who deal with prejudice of any kind, can kind of
Right.
see themselves in horror, because they're seen as like a monster, if you will. Like you're talking about that symbolism earlier. And I think that perhaps that is why horror speaks to people so much and really resonates. Do you think that's the case?
Oh, 100%. I totally think it is. I know, just even because all of us have such different stories, but we're all still united in the fact that that's what it is for us. Some of us were bullied, some of us weren't bullied. They just felt like they were alone, or that they were like the outcast. And that's all we heard. It was the symbolism. We wanted to get like a psychologist's opinion at some point to put it in there. That was one of the things we were working on when we were going to go to LA, because we wanted that psychology standpoint from like, why do people connect with these films? Not just connecting with the heroes. A lot of people connect with the villains, the bad guy, or like the whole like Frankenstein's monster of it. Like, why, like he wasn't really a bad person. The monster wasn't really a bad person. It's the people around him that made him the bad person. And so I think that symbolism is very spot on. That's the key to it, and that's the reason why people do connect with it. And the more documentaries that people put out, or the more shows like it's called Queer for Fear, and like more things like that, I think will expand and broaden other people's minds who aren't necessarily into horror. We the woman who saved my life when I was 12 years old, I don't talk about this in the documentary, but the woman who saved my life when I was 12 years old came back into my life 10 years later. and she ended up officiating my wedding and all of this stuff. And she's really great in my life. She went to Vanderbilt, all of this stuff. I sent her the documentary when I was done, and I just was like, I just want to send you this. It's like a thank you for everything, blah, 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 blah. And she watched it, and she was like not a horror fan at all, a very highly educated woman. And she just was like, I'm blown away that this is what the culture is, and what this community really is. And she's like, I almost wish I was still studying for my PhD at Vanderbilt, because this is something I would want to talk about, this whole concept. And she's like, can I share it with some of my colleagues? And I was like, absolutely, share it. And then our attorney, for our film, when we were done, after she cleared everything and we were all good, sent us a follow-up email, and she just said, on a side note, I want to thank you. I'm not a big horror fan at all. I've never seen A Nightmare on Elm Street. She goes, but now having watched your documentary 2 times, I went back and watched the Nancy Saga 1, 3, and 7. And she's like, they are amazing and beautiful films, and I understand the symbolism, and now I'm a fan, so thank you. Like, and so for us, like, I feel like if we continue to expand this, other people will continue to see what we see, because horror is really popular right now. It's getting a lot of love and attention, but it's also kind of going the way I feel like how superhero movies were, how like we were all like the nerdy kids reading comic books and fans of X-Men, and we got made fun of for it. And now all the popular kids are into Marvel and all of that stuff. And they don't really connect with it and see the symbolism that we did when we were, younger, that it was really truly meant for that. And I feel like horror is kind of becoming that way as well too. I feel like people are just going, newer fans are going into it for like, oh, the kills or the shock, or it's this movie and it's that movie, and it's, Jordan Peele's producing this big budget horror, or all of this stuff, which is great because then we get more horror in the world. But I think documentaries like ours and Scream Queens and The Shutter Show and I Am Nancy, and just other documentaries and other genres of films, not just Nightmare, I think that those, I hope, are going to start expanding the mind of why we're horror fans, and maybe somebody else can connect with it that didn't connect with it on that level, could see it and be like, oh, and it changes their opinion on it. And I used to say I love smart horror, where like it had like a message and a meaning, and I realized I was demeaning and degrading horror as a genre by saying that, because somebody could look at Nightmare on Elm Street and think of it as a cheesy 1980s slasher movie that has horrible acting and no demeaning. But to me, it's my entire world. And so I feel like doing these types of things and these documentaries, I hope, are going to open people's minds, because even my mind has gotten opened doing this process.
Absolutely. And I haven't been to a horror convention for a while because of COVID, but I'm actually going to go to Monster Mania in, well, I think it's April.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to the one in Maryland. I've only been to the one in Cherry Hill, but I'm going to the one in Maryland because of William Shatner. And I know that you mentioned Clue, and I think something that people should watching this should not take for granted is time. What I mean by that is William Shatner is 91, going to be 92, I think, this year. And
Yeah.
I met him years ago at Wizard World with Scott Bakula. They had all the Star Trek captains there. It was amazing. But I was like, you know what? I really want to meet him again. And like, I don't know how much longer he's going to be around. And I
Right.
think that's something like a lot of times we'll take these conventions for granted and say, oh, I'll see Robert Englund next time he's around, or I'll see so and so next time he's around. Well, I wanted to meet Larry Drake, who was in Darkman a few years back at Monster Mania, and then he died before the show. So, I mean, just don't take these people for granted if they mean something to you. Go to these conventions and meet them. If it requires saving up some money or whatever, do it. And I think that if you can do a photo and an autograph, cool. But I think a photo will mean more to you in the long run than an autograph.
Yeah.
And just you got to make those memories are what you're going to look back on. And I'm sure you do now. And we're not that old. I assume we're similar in age, but I
Right.
look back on those experiences of meeting these people and having these conversations and things, and thinking, wow, like how did I do that? How did I interview Barry Manilow? How did I sing on stage with Gene Simmons? How did I have these opportunities? And you with these moments of Heather Langenkamp producing this documentary. I don't know if you ever plan on having a child or not, but whoever you, when you're older and you can look back and say, hey, I produced this documentary, I created this. like something you can really be proud of. And I think that's why I was, I kind of went on a little bit of a tirade here, but I just think that, time slips away really easily. So if you
Mhm.
want to go to that convention and meet someone, whether it's either of us or a celebrity, do it. And or if there's a project you want to do, don't put it off. Like get started now. Like I'm writing a book myself about the first 20 years of TNA wrestling, which is now Impact Wrestling, because no one ever wrote a book about the
Right.
company. Similar to you creating this documentary that no one ever created. It's almost like create the documentary you want to watch, write the book you want to read.
Exactly.
Don't wait for someone else to fulfill your dream. Do it yourself.
Somebody's gonna
Um,
come along and do it. If you're not gonna do it, at some point, somewhere, somebody's gonna come along and do it. So why not you be the one to do it?
exactly. And only you can do it the way you do it. So thank you for doing this. I mean, this has really just been special. All of you should be very proud of it. I'm happy to support it and looking forward to getting my copy. I'll make sure to spread the word. I encourage all of you to buy a copy. And just so they know, it's on Amazon, but it's also available elsewhere, right?
Yeah, so we are available on FYE, deepdiscounts.com, Amazon, and I believe Walmart.com. Because I mean, we keep selling out everywhere. That's the problem. So they have it on different sites and different people have different stocks, but every time they sell out, they restock. So everyone who has purchased it will get it, and everybody will have a chance to purchase it.
Great. And for people who want to keep up to know about future potential for streaming or buying on, iTunes or Amazon, et cetera, digitally, should they follow you guys at fredheadsdoc.com or anywhere else?
Yeah, so we have a website called fredheadstock.com. And you can also follow us on our social medias. We're pretty active on our Facebook, which is just at fredheadstock. We have an Instagram and we have a Twitter, but we're not as active on there as much just because of the algorithms. You don't really see a whole lot. We update a lot on our website, and then I update a lot on my like personal socials and stuff like that too.
Excellent. So I encourage you guys to follow them everywhere, buy the DVD, and yeah, go to more horror conventions, connect with people who are just like you, and who knows, maybe one of you watching this will create your own documentary, and we look forward to watching that as well. So thank you, Paige, for your time, for your story. This has really just been inspiring, and you should be very proud of what you've accomplished, and um, just now you can kind of see, and hopefully you get to meet that kid again, so you can
Mhm.
get a picture with him holding up the DVD. That'd be really cool to see.
That's what I hope. I hope that moment. Thank you so much for having me on. It's been so much fun, and thank you for enjoying the documentary.
All right, thank you. Take care.